Okay, welcome everyone. This is the Contour community meeting for Tuesday, October 27th. So let's get started and see. I don't think we have any news as of yet in terms of Contour content. So we'll jump into what we've been working on. So Daniel, you have an operator update.
I do. So we actually have a functioning operator. So excited to kind of hit this first milestone. You could take a look at the README and deploy Contour in a few simple steps. And what you're seeing here too, here's the README. So it is functional, and if you've got a kind cluster, you can go ahead and get the operator up and going in a few steps and test it out. Would appreciate any feedback. So it's exciting to get to this point where we actually have something that is functional. And then the other bit of news is we have a V1 Alpha 1 release of the operator scheduled for December 4th to coincide with the 1.11 release of Contour. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. So I think the idea, we have to figure that out too. I don't know. I'm sort of, I posted some notes in Slack on dates. We typically release every month, but given the holidays and stuff coming up, I'm just concerned we're going to have releases with nothing in them in a sense. So, but anyway, yeah, I think based on our current monthly release, 1.10 would come out, this week would be the schedule. And then 1.11 would come out. I picked the 4th just because it was after Thanksgiving holiday here in the US.
Yeah, and if that date shifts for Contour, let's shift the date here as well.
Sure.
The target being is I don't see, even though we have something functional, if you look at this milestone, there's still some work that we want to accomplish. And so I think trying to release for 110, you said in the next week is definitely too aggressive. So, we're targeting that following release 111, get all these issues here that are identified in the milestone knocked out, and then do all the bits to make sure that we synchronize the operator with Contour. And so, yeah, that's kind of two big pieces of news. We got something that works, and we've got some dates and work identified to get the operator ready to go for kind of its first release of V1 Alpha 1 release with 111.
Is it the intent for that V1 Alpha 1 to have like this is, you have to have all the development tools locally and everything to run this, and is there a way that you can like kube control apply some YAML to get this running?
Yeah, so the intent would be an experience similar to the getting started guide now, where we would have an installation based on the operator documented, and that experience would be very similar to what we see today, where it would be a simple kubectl apply that would apply the bits to get the operator running in a cluster, and then we would follow the example steps. The next step would be to deploy an example instance of Contour, which again would be a kubectl apply, just like what you see there. Yep.
Okay.
And then we would essentially just jump into the example workload of what the official documentation site has today.
Okay, awesome. So this would be enough to get, what a Contour looks like. Cool. Very cool. That's awesome. Thank you all for your work. I know you folks have been doing a great job. So thank you very much for all the support.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's involvement. It's been really fun to get the community together around a new project. And the V1 Alpha 1 release will be nice. I think there will be some benefits, but I'm really excited for kind of the follow-on release or releases where I think that's really going to drive things like the configurable network endpoint publishing, options for certificate management, all of those things. I think that's where it's really going, the operator is really going to shine. So that's really what I'm excited for.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and if folks have any more ideas or please look at this milestone that Danian has set up in Micaiah. And then, please put your open up issues and stuff just to give your thoughts about what, future things can have. That'd be great. Very cool. So what's next? So I guess next one's me. So anything else, I guess, on the operator bits before I move on?
Nope, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, thanks. So as everyone knows, the V2, the Envoy V2 XDS API is being deprecated in the first quarter of 2021. There's now a log in the in 1.16. So if you run a V2, so right now if you run Contour with Envoy 1.16, you'll see an error message or a warning saying, "Hey, you're using the old version, you need to upgrade." So this work's been ongoing for a while, and last week we had a maintainer meeting, and James brought up a good point about, hey, how do we actually move from V2 to V3? So say you have a production cluster and you've got a bunch of things running. What is the way to do that in a way that doesn't require you to break all of your traffic? So we've done some digging. There are some ways that the Envoy community has said you can run different transport versions with different resource versions and stuff. I messed around with that a bunch yesterday and this week, and I struggled with getting a lot of that to work. But what I did get working was this suggestion from James, who mentioned that we can run both versions in the single XDS server. So the idea is that when we run Contour today, we just serve up a V2 endpoint for all of our XDS resources. The idea would be that we would run both V2 and V3 in parallel, so that depending on the client, if the client requests a V2 endpoint, we could return a V2 one. If they request a V3, we could return a V3 endpoint. And what that will do is let us upgrade slowly. So the client determining what version they want is based on the bootstrap config. So there's an init container in Contour which generates some JSON files, which is what we pass to Envoy. And in that, we can define what version we want to do. If you don't define those versions, it defaults to V2. But now going forward, we're going to specify V3. So we actually merged in a server version into Contour, which was this XDS server version singular. And my initial idea was to say, hey, we could say, let's serve up a V2 or a V3 endpoint. But that breaks this story here in a way, because as soon as you upgrade Contour to say V3, all of your V2 clients won't be able to serve any traffic or won't get updates. So that could be problematic depending on how long it takes you to roll out your Envoy fleet. So I guess what I'm proposing, and we haven't decided this yet, is to change this, because we haven't shipped this yet in any version. Change this configuration item to versions, plural, and then you can specify in here what versions you want to serve up. So when you want to do this migration, you could say, I want V2 and V3. Once you're fully migrated, you could take off the V2, and then the V2 won't get served at all. So again, to hide those endpoints. And that should give you that transition time to move from one to the other. And then looking forward, so hey, when V4 comes out, you could add, in Contour add support for that. We could add V3 and V4 to then buy into that. But maybe you don't want to yet because V4 is maybe still alpha or beta. You can leave that V4 off and Contour wouldn't serve that. So it's kind of my idea going forward, I think. So I'm curious what folks think about that. But once we get this solved, then we'll be able to go and move along and get the rest of the V3 bits installed. Because I want to get this done so folks can start upgrading before support's pulled. So if you have any thoughts, let me know. There's an issue here, this 3047, which describes his upgrade plan. And then I believe 1898 is the XDS V3 upgrade issue, yeah, where everything's getting tagged into. So you'll see a bunch of PRs getting tagged across this.
Just a question: is it so that this is really then targeting the old envoys that do not talk V3 yet? So this support for V2, I mean, Envoy has had support for V3 obviously for quite some time now, but V2 needs to be supported by Contour in order to support those older envoys. Is that the case?
You're asking why these configuration items are in here, or you're saying you have?
No, I was just wondering that what will be the use case for V2 since Envoy has supported V3 for quite some time. So I'm assuming that continuing to support V2 in Contour is targeting older Envoy versions, older than when V3 was introduced.
Oh, so the reason why we're sort of, yeah, if you look in the code, we're actually duplicating all of the logics. You'll see here in like in internal, there's an Envoy package, and now there's a V2, and I've added a V3 here on some PRs. So to not make this change dramatic to folks, we wanted to let folks buy into the V3 API. I don't suspect there'll be any issue. Like you said, V3 has been out, I think, since the beginning of this year, 2020. But the idea is that we've repositioned ourselves to have them versioned out now, so that there is a V2 package, there'll be a V3 here soon, and potentially a V4, and so on in the future. So yeah, after January or after whenever Envoy deprecates it, and then we'll just delete all these V2 packages out of here, I think, and then that'll all be gone. So the idea is to be able to let folks decide how they want to move without Contour forcing them into a change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And how will it then work regarding the code that now needs to be duplicated for a certain period of time? How are changes done then during that time? We need to have the same changes if they happen to hit the code here. We need to then make all the changes in all of the versions.
Yeah, it had to go in both places. Yeah, it's unfortunate. Yeah. There's not a good way to have like one generic type and then export logic the same way. I have tried to pull out all the bits that are the same across them. So you'll see like in the Envoy package here, all of these files are generic across any version. But within each package, it's all the specific, like this returns, a V2 access log and not a V3 version and stuff. So yeah, it will have to duplicate that work, which is sort of unfortunate. And that's the same way the Go control plane does it. When you make a change, there's a code that duplicates the V2 to V3. And I think once V2 is deprecated, they'll reverse that, and then they'll have it generate the V2 backwards. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder how was this done, because I mean in Envoy side when the V3 was introduced, I was back then doing some work in Envoy code, and I didn't see it duplicated there. So somehow it supported both V2 and V3 without duplication on that side. But
Sure.
Yeah, I understand how on the details how it was done.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess the maintainers got together and decided this was the best route. My initial thought was just to remove V2 and just switch to V3, and then be done with it. But there's a risk to get that all done in one release and tested and validated. And then the second one is if there are any issues, then this way you've got a way out. So we haven't changed the V2 code, but you can buy into the V3 and move on that way. So, and it should only be that like a month or two, so 2 releases or so, and then that'll be it. So
yeah.
I've joined super late, but
no
yeah, I guess our preference would be to just cut to V3, because we sort of do rebuilds and repaves, and like the whole V2 to V3 migration is less of a concern for us, and it should be transparent from an end user point of view. I want to say end user, like even someone operating Contour. I was sort of hoping it would be under the covers. And then just lastly, from an Envoy community point of view, they're really keen to remove V2. So as soon as it's deprecated, they're going to pull all the code out because they're carrying V2, V3, and V4 alpha. It has impacts on build times and CI and stuff. Sure. So you can expect the Envoy community is going to move pretty quick to get rid of V2 pretty soon, as soon as they can. Okay.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, we were just discussing, Michael, about an upgrade plan. So if you have any thoughts in that same doc, I think you commented in already. We were just discussing how to do this. So folks that maybe can't cut from V2 to V3 all at once, we have an idea to move up to progressively move from 2 to 3 in an active cluster. So cool. So yeah, so that's all coming. Anyone has any thoughts, please comment on I guess this issue is a good one, or that 1898 is the other issue that has the V3 plan or the V3 issue in Contour. So that should all be done soon. I expect once we get over, I have a Bootstrap PR in now to have the clients bootstrap a v3 endpoints. And then from there, it's just moving on to clusters, listeners, routes, and everything else. So it shouldn't be too bad.
Hey, Steve, I want to just make sure I understand some of the timing for issue 3047. Is the plan to have this issue resolved in 110 or a later release?
It only applies when we have the full support for v3. So this is more of a placeholder to think about how folks who can't upgrade, by building new clusters, if they need to upgrade an in-place upgrade, how would they do that? So it really applies to as soon as the v3 stuff is done. And I doubt we're not going to have it done for next week or for this week if we did a release of Contour. Gotcha. So yeah, it would be the next release. So Contour 111 would be where all this would apply.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, cool. So I've talked enough. Let's go see what I have next. Steve K, you have some docs about rate limiting.
Yeah, so I'm picking up rate limiting again. So I know this has been a long-standing feature request for Contour. I think the original issue is number 370 or something like that. And I know stevesloka has done a bunch of work on this in the past, but due to competing priorities and different things, haven't been able to get it merged yet. But yeah, so what I've been doing is just putting together kind of a background doc on rate limiting support. And so this isn't really yet a full design doc. It's really just capturing a bunch of background information on work in Contour to date on rate limiting, as well as a bunch of information on how Envoy supports rate limiting. And then it starts to sketch out a couple possible design directions for Contour to support this. But the goal of this document is really to hopefully to collect feedback from users and other folks who are interested in this feature, so that we can sort of get to a consensus on what direction we want to go with rate limiting. So I guess just to get into the details of it a little bit, Envoy has kind of two different modes for rate limiting that it supports. And so the first one is called local rate limiting, which basically applies per Envoy process. So each individual Envoy applies rate limits to routes. And so you can say, limit requests on this route to 100 per second or something like that. But the rate limiting, as the name implies, is not shared across envoys. So in the context of Contour, where you have Envoy deployed as a daemon set, each individual Envoy pod would have its own rate limits, and each pod would enforce that constraint that say a route can only get 100 requests per second. But if the requests are being routed across through different Envoy pods over time, then each one would have its own kind of rate limit that it enforces. And so it's useful. It's kind of a starting point, but it definitely lacks some of the sophistication and flexibility that some users may need. And so Envoy also has a global rate limiting, which allows the Envoy pods to essentially, as requests are coming in, Envoy will call out to an external rate limit service to make a rate limiting decision. And so since the service is external to all the envoys, the rate limits are kind of shared across all the different Envoy clients. And then Lyft provides a reference implementation of this rate limit service, which you can use if you want for making your rate limit decisions, but it's also pluggable. So as long as you adhere to the gRPC interface, you can plug your own service there. So, and so that model kind of, it looks pretty similar to how the external authorization stuff works, where you have an external service and it's configured as a cluster in Envoy, and then Envoy is connecting to it as requests are coming in and being processed. So that one definitely provides a lot more flexibility in terms of exactly how you rate limit and defining different policies, and then actually sharing those rate limits across all the different envoys. But it comes at the cost of complexity, right? So you have to deploy a separate rate limit service. You have to configure Envoy to know how to talk to that rate limit service. You have a whole sort of language for defining rate limit policies. So it's definitely much more complex than the local approach. So I think we're really just looking to start to gather feedback from users on what they're looking for and whether they want the kind of simple local-based version or whether they want to operate their own rate limit services, and if they're going to operate rate limit services, whether they'd look to use the Lyft implementation or their own versions. So anyway, I'll kind of stop there. I put up a draft PR with what I've got so far here. And so I would really appreciate, for anyone who's interested, take a read through this, comment any comments, any questions, any input you have, so that we can start to figure out what direction we want to go with this.
Just a couple of comments on the rate limiting, because I've looked into this in the past. So that local rate limit service that you referenced there is the brand new, when I say brand new, only like a couple of weeks old version that was upstreamed by Pinterest, and it's like a layer 7 HTTP rate limit.
Mm-hmm.
There is another local rate limiter, which is L4, which has been there for longer. So there's an L4 network filter rate limiter, which works on a similar concept to this one. So there's actually sort of 3 modes. There's network L4, the one you reference, and then the external one. So just be aware of that, because it's not clear in the documentation. It's hard to work out, but there's 2 different local rate limiters.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to pull out some details on that. Thanks for the pointer.
And they may or may not be relevant. And then with the external one, we've actually have some teams deploying that internally. I've done some testing with it, and as you said, there's a complexity impact there, and the locality of the Redis cache to the actual envoys becomes super important in this context. So the way to make it really work high performance is to run the rate limit service on a socket inside the pod of the Envoy, because that removes all of the network overhead because it's got to query the rate limit service on each request. And so it has to be highly tuned to operate a high performance rate limit. It's got to be incredibly well thought about in terms of how you interact with Redis. And the highest performance is no network on sockets, but again, tons of complexity. So I don't know, this is an interesting area, lots of demand for this, but I think the external rate limit would be very hard for Contour to pull off, in my opinion. But we'll see.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the input. And but within this doc, I have a little bit of information on some of the other ingress controllers out there and what they support. And if you look at things like Ambassador and Glue, they do support configuring an external rate limit service, but at least in their open source versions, operating it is kind of left up to the user. So it's up to you to figure out how you want to deploy it and operate it and configure it. So I think that definitely speaks to just some of the challenges that exist there with doing that.
I think part B then is the UX of how you configure it too. So like if you have an external rate limiting service, you've got to configure, and then you've got to configure your routes and then have those things match up the right way. There's a UX there that could leave you with errors, I guess, if things don't all match up properly with the rate limiting service as well as your Contour configuration, that sort of stuff. So cool. Yeah. So have your thoughts. Thank you, Michael, for those. That's great feedback in terms of the sockets and those sort of bits, because that's very helpful. At least to put that in the doc so we don't lose track of that. Cool. What else? So Taro, do you have we have a few minutes left here. We can chat about some more things here. You have a 503 routes for misconfigured services.
Yeah, this is small. This is just a small bug fix to fix an inconsistency when ingresses that point out single virtual host. One of those is pointing to a missing service, and I just had one question that I wanted to ask. We can also chat in the GitHub, but this same behavior or problem is in HTTP proxy in a way, but it behaves differently. That if you have HTTP proxy with single virtual host and 2 routes, then one pointing to a missing service, the whole virtual host will go down. Is that intentional, and why? the other route could still work, but the whole virtual host will go down.
Yeah. So with HTTP proxy, somehow we've gotten into this thing where there's an error in the configuration, and it just removes that object from service. So depending on where that is in the chain, it can break everything really easily. So I know there's some steps to resolve that. The first step was to have the conditions added to the objects, that now we can return a set of errors or conditions that are wrong with everything with that resource. So I think we can start filling that information in and then change that behavior. But the tricky part is knowing from a cold start what is the valid configuration. Like if you ignore one service but not the other. But there's some weird edge cases that I'm not describing very well at the moment. But yeah, I think we should also look at that as well, because it's very bad. I did that once. I fat fingered a certificate on one of my resources, and then everything just broke, and I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah. All right, but I would be interested to fix also that part. Now in the case of Ingress, I have a proposal in the PR that we can discuss later. But if we can cover also Ingress, it would be great.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you for this. Very cool. Very cool. All right, so let's move on to the discussion things here. Daniel, you got a bunch of things with a few minutes. What?
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
we're running out of time.
Right.
If we don't get to all of this, we could always push it out to next week. But I was just interested in better understanding how kind of issue and PR triage is handled in Contour, so that we can try to replicate that for the operator.
Yeah. So I think there's some labels that we can sync in. So all these different triage labels and bits sync from a GitHub .github folder, so that every repo is the same. And then based on these labels, whenever a new issue is added, it gets this lifecycle needs triage. And the idea is that this should be a key for us to go and triage things. So these things haven't been looked through by maintainers yet. So that gives you the cycle to do that. So you can rotate through these issues and then review them and decide whether they're accepted or not, and then retag them with whatever labels they need.
And those same labels are available in the operator repo, I would assume.
This should be on. I think you have to copy them. This is what we were trying to work out, was having generic, like, organization level things. So I think in not there. There's like a PR sync labels, which I think just calls site data GitHub labels. Yeah. So in site _data GitHub labels, boom. So these are all the labels that Contour has. So I think we need to grab this file and then that GitHub action, and that will automatically sync these in to your repo.
Let me create an issue for that in the operator, see if I could try to handle that myself. And if not, if I would get lost with the directions that you gave me here, then I'll ping you through Slack.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Yeah, so that's that bit. And then any Contour content coming for KubeCon?
Yeah, again, I know we're at the end of time here, and these last two I prefer not rushing through, and just we'll discuss it maybe next week or during an office hours. So
yeah, that sounds good.
We can do that.
Cool. So yeah, we'll do that. To either, I think Thursday we have office hours. And otherwise, next week is the 6:30 Eastern Australia time zone community meeting is next Tuesday. So, anyone have anything else to add before we end today? No. All right, cool. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you, Daniel, and folks, for all the operator work, and everyone for all their participation. I really appreciate it. So we will catch you all Thursdays office hours from 1 to 3 Eastern. And then the next community meeting will be next Tuesday at 6:30 Eastern. So have a good week. We'll see you all later.
Thanks, everyone.